Hey everyone, in this video let's take a look at question 271, encode and decode strings on Leetcode. This is part of our blind 75 list of questions, so let's begin. Now this question is actually a premium question, and that's why we're doing it on the Leetcode website. That's why the number here is different, but otherwise the question, the test cases, and the solution will be the same. So let's take a look. In this question, we want to design an algorithm to encode a list of strings into a string. The encoded string is then sent over to the network and is decoded back to the original list of strings. We want to implement encode and decode. So let's take a look at what this is saying. Essentially, we're given some sort of input value, which is a list of strings here, and we want to encode this all into one string. Then that is fed into the decode function, and then the decode function essentially parses the encoded string back to the original format. So we can see that in this case, what do they actually do? So let's take a look. And again, we use this website to run our premium problems, so we don't have to pay for them. Okay, so what exactly do they do? Well, it looks like something they're doing is they're basically just joining all of these based off of the colon and the semicolon. And it looks like they just parse that, and so you have our answer back here. Now, you could do that. Maybe in this scenario, what do they do? In this scenario, well, notice how we already have the colon here. So if you really go ahead and you parse by the same thing, like you add in this colon and the semicolon here, notice how it kind of gets a little bit ugly here, right? Because you have the colon and semicolon and colon and colon and the colon, semicolon, etc. So there are many ways to do this type of problem. You know, one way is definitely just to like separate out your values by some sort of delimiter. But we're actually not sure of like the values that can appear in the list, right? It doesn't really say. I think really anything can appear in the list. So we don't want to separate our values by just anything, and it kind of needs to be something that you know has some sort of meaning, right? In this case, like the delimiter just means like split based off of like the first occurrence of this, right? But for example, like what if there was like something like this in the list, right? Then it just gets a little bit strange if you think about it. So what's a way in which we can like solve this problem? Now, this is one of those questions where like you really kind of have to think about it because there's just so many different approaches, and there's some things that work, some things that don't. But what we essentially need is we need to encode it in a way such that we don't really care what the value is here, right? Like, it's not like we're looking for some sort of value. We need to encode it in a way such that we don't actually care what the value is. We just understand where the strings start and where the strings stop. So how might we go about doing this? Well, let's take a look in this example, this Leetcode love you. Now, one way that I'm thinking that kind of makes sense to me is what if maybe I could somehow just notice how many characters there are as part of every single letter or every single word. So maybe I can code it into something like for lint, for code, for love, and then 3u. So what does this mean? Well, if I read a number, it means that I want to go 4 spaces in front, and then I get my word. And then my next word will be another number, and then what I want to do, well, that would be 4 spaces in front. It'll be another word. And the same thing over here. And finally, same thing over here. Now, this actually turns out to be a really good solution. But the problem here is that, like, what if we had something like this, right? Like a 5 over here. Well, then in the end, we would have something like 1 and 5, right? Which doesn't really make sense here because it's like 15, and that it doesn't really make sense here. So how can we go about improving this? Well, one thing we could do is, like, after writing the number, maybe we could have our delimiter in this case. So maybe our delimiter is something like hashtag. So if we had in a hashtag, then it becomes very clear to us, right? What I do is I read in the number, and then I read in the hashtag, and then after the first hashtag, maybe it's possible that there's like hashtags over here, right? Maybe this is something like this, but we don't care because after the very first hashtag, I already know how many characters to read ahead, and so I'll read that many, and then again, I'll restart the process. So in this sense, it's actually a very good solution because we don't have to worry about a number case. We don't have to worry about hashtags being reused or not, because all we do is we look for a number, and maybe this is like 45 or 44. So we try to go as much as we can, but the moment we hit our hashtag, then we know that we want to read that amount of characters forward. And then we again go ahead and we do our number case again. So let's take a look at how we might be able to do this. And again, this is one of those questions that you just really have to think about it a lot because there's many different approaches, but this is one that works for me, and I think it's a pretty good one. So let's take a look how we can do it. Okay, so one thing we will need is we'll need our string here, And now I want to go through my string. So in order to go through it, I will just do something like, actually, maybe we can call this res here, and I'll return res in the very end. And I can do something like for s in stirs. Then to res, what do I want to append? I want to append something like this, right? The length, and then the hashtag, and then the string itself. So how can I do that? Maybe I'll just do some string formatting. So I will do the length of the string, then the hashtag, and then the string itself. So the length of s, then the hashtag we don't have to worry about. And maybe we can just add in the hashtag to kind of make it clear. Hashtag, and then s itself. Okay, and so then I think this is all good. So maybe just to test this out, we will return, instead of stir here, I would just call it s. I don't like using stir, so I would just return an empty string, and I would just print s to kind of see that it works. So let's take a look. Okay, so we're getting what we expect. Perfect. And now what? So for example, if we had like a number here, like maybe this was had the number like 2, then we would get like 1 hashtag 2, which is fine. Okay, so how can we go about decoding this? Well, let's just take a look, and I'll go ahead and actually, it looks like we have it here, so we don't need to worry about that. But how can we decode this? Well, first of all, notice that if our s is empty, if our s is an empty string, right? Then in this case, we just have an empty list because our res will be empty, right? Our res will just be empty. Okay, so now we have at least one element. So what can I do? Well, now I need to go through my string. And so maybe I'll call res here, which will be actually be an array. And then I'll return my res in the very end. But now what do I need to do? Well, now I need to go through my array. So I will keep an I pointer, and I will do while I is less than what? Less than length of s. Less than length of s, right? Okay, so now what do we need to do? Well, initially when I'm starting off, I want to try to read as many numbers as I can, and then I want to try to go until I reach a hashtag. So something I can do, for example, is I can say j is equal to I, and then I can do while s at j does not equal a hashtag. Then what I want to do is I want to keep reading forward, and I want to understand like the number that's formed. And so how can I understand a number? Well, something you could actually do is you can do num is starting off at 0, and then what we could do is we know that this num here, this is kind of the trick. You'll do num times 10 plus, I guess, int s at j, and then j plus equals 1. So for example, when j starts off over here, then num times 10, so that will be 0 plus 4, which is just 4. Okay, and so move j forward. Now it's 4, but num will already be 4, right? So num here will be 4. So it'll be 4 times 10, which is 40, plus another 4, so that's 44. So now num is 44. And then here, it would actually be 44 times 10, which is 440. And then we add in the 3, so it's 443, etc. So that's how this one will work. And then we'll keep doing that. And by the time we're out here, j will be at this hashtag over here. Okay, so now that j is at this hashtag over here, what it means is that we can advance j actually once more, right? We'll advance j once more. So now j is over here, and now we want to read that many characters forward. So what can we do? Well, maybe I'll just call this value k here, and I'll set k equal to j. And then what I want to do is I want to read that many letters forward. So I can do while num, because num will be kind of like a value, right? Like maybe in this case, it's actually just 4, right? In this case, it's just 4. So maybe this is our k over here. So I can do while num is greater than 0. Then what do I want to do? Well, now we need like some sort of temporary variable to keep track of the string, right? Then I need some sort of temporary variable. And then what I will do is I will add to this temporary variable, I will do temp plus equals. It will be s at k, right? S at k. And so then this is here, and so we'll move k up by 1, and then we'll actually decrease num by 1. So now k is over here, and num is 3, and then num is 2, and then num is 1, and then actually after num is 1, and then we move over here, then num will be 0, right? Because if you think about it, initially when we start off, num is 4, but then we decrease it by 1 and we increase k, so now num is 3, and now num is 2. And then when we're on the t, num is 1, but then when we process this t, num will be 0. So then we'll essentially restart. So after we're done all this, we actually need to advance our I pointer to be k plus 1, right? or I guess just k in this case. So I will advance I to be k. And so then if we arrive at the solution, can actually, it looks like I need to append to res, right? So after this is done, I will do res.append temp. So let's take a look. And so we get the solution. Let's go ahead and submit it. And again, we can see it works. So this is a working solution. What is the time? Well, it's just O of n, really, in both of these cases. Space-wise, kind of the same thing. It's actually just constant space because we are not using anything. Okay, so this is this video. Thanks for watching.